It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, sponsored by Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia, Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the companies, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. Now, here are your hosts.
Good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. Welcome back to the show. We're coming to you today live from UPS Supply Chain Solutions in beautiful Alpharetta, Georgia. Today's show is the first installment of a new series here on Supply Chain Now Radio, one that we're calling the VETLANTA Voice series. So on this show, we're going to be focusing on the veteran community from a supply chain perspective, of course. So we've partnered with the fine folks over at VETLANTA, which is an outstanding organization based here in Atlanta that has been doing incredible work for veterans for several years, and you're going to learn more about the VETLANTA story here in a few minutes. Now, you know I'm a big believer in you give from what you have. So here at Supply Chain Now Radio, we are fortunate to be able to spotlight a wide variety of people and companies, technologies, best practices, of course, across the end and supply chain space. So we are really honored to be able to spotlight an area that is near and dear to our heart, our veteran community. So like all of our series on Supply Chain Now Radio, you can find our replays on a variety of channels: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and of course our friends over at Business Radio X. As always, we'd love to have you subscribe so you don't miss anything. So let's welcome in our featured guest today. Today we've got Lloyd Knight, Director of International Air Freight LMG at UPS Global Forwarding, also a co-founder and president of VETLANTA. Lloyd, how you doing?
Great, Scott. Thanks for having me today.
I'm glad. Great to have you back on the show. You were with us at Emory back in April. We had a great conversation with a few folks, including a dynamic duo from Home Depot. A great conversation, and really that episode served as kind of the got the ball rolling on, hey, let's talk about this once a month, maybe a couple times a month, I don't know. Also want to welcome in John Phillips, author of Boots to Loafers, and also a co-founder and vice president of VETLANTA. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing there, Scott?
Doing fantastic. And John, I don't know if you're going to remember this little bit of trivia or not. We have just published our 117th episode in Supply Chain Now Radio. And do you recall who was on episode 2, I think it was? It was our resident veteranologist.
Was it me?
Yeah, John Phillips.
Wow. And actually, that had the lady from UPS, too.
Yes, Elba Preha Gallagher.
Yes.
Absolutely. Man, that feels like it's 7 years ago now, but that was just a couple years ago. But great to have Lloyd and John. It's been neat from a personal standpoint to get plugged into the VETLANTA community and volunteer and be part of all the neat things they're doing to serve our veteran community. So, again, thanks to both of y'all for joining us. But we want to start with getting to know each of you better, right? We want to get our audience to have a better appreciation for y'all's professional journey, much like I've got. And Lloyd, I want to start with you. So if you would, tell us about yourself, including your transition from the military, and a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, great, Scott. So I'm a United States Air Force veteran. I joined the Kentucky Air National Guard when I was 17 years old and decided to go active duty when I was 18 and went off to basic training about 7 days after high school graduation. And I had one of the best jobs ever in the U.S. military. I was an aircraft loadmaster. So at the age of 18, I was flying all around the world, delivering cargo, you name it.
And in supply chain, and maybe not even knowing you were in supply chain at the time.
Absolutely. You know what? I didn't really figure out I was in supply chain or logistics until late in my career. I never really, I was an arrogant air crew member. I never realized, hey, that cargo in the back, that has a purpose. You know what? I realized that that's a great story, and we'll probably get a little off track. I realized that when I was deployed somewhere, and I was deployed to a location in the desert, and it was not your typical aircrew deployment. And I went to the dining facility. It was in a tent, and I ordered French toast. And the cook looks at me and goes, "Absolutely, we can make you French toast, but the pallet that just got offloaded from that airplane, we need to break that down. It's got the bread on it.
Okay.
And I realized, holy cow, I'm a logistician. I'm more than an aircrew member. I'm truly doing logistics. So I had a great Air Force career. I saw a little bit of everything. I flew 3 years operationally, including in Desert Storm. Then I was in flight tests for 8 years. So I flew a multitude of different aircraft and supported different flight test programs. I went to Germany for 4 years. I was in a deployable mobile command and control unit in Germany. And I also taught aircraft load planning and would drive all over Europe teaching load planning.
So if you could, for our audience, maybe if you're like me, you've never flown on the operational side of the aircraft. You might have purchased a ticket and flown from here to Kansas City or something. When you talk about aircraft load plan, what are you talking about?
So really to maximize the space of an airplane and ensure that the cargo is balanced, that the hazmat is compatible for it, and that you do it in a very efficient method. You wouldn't want to have to unload the entire airplane to get to a pallet that might be in the front of the airplane at your first stop. So the pilots take care of everything on the front end of a cargo aircraft, and the load masters take care of everything to the right of the entry door.
And they get to wear those cool flight suits.
And you get to wear the cool flight suits. So you look very cool.
Yes.
So from the mobile command and the control, after that, I had an assignment at Headquarters Air Mobility Command in Scott Air Force Base, which is almost identical to the building we're sitting in. That job is so much like what I've done here at UPS. And then I had the best assignment in my Air Force career. I finished up as a first sergeant. And the first sergeant in the Air Force is about morale, welfare, and discipline. You're the commander's right-hand leader responsible for ensuring that the workforce remains deployable. So, I had 17 years of logistics experience in aviation and 3 years as a first sergeant. And I can tell you, I use the skills that I developed as a first sergeant more in today's environment than I do the 4 college degrees in the 17 years of logistics.
Absolutely. So as you're leading up to your transition from the Air Force, talk to us a little more about that.
I love the Air Force, and I retired loving it. I retired at the very earliest possible time, 20 years and like 6 days, and I was doing really well. I was a master sergeant, was really promotable for the next rank, and decided, hey, I got all these degrees. It's a good time to look at retirement. And so I actually put my paperwork in right at the 19-year mark and focused, in addition to my last year on active duty, on having a successful transition. And I was really wide open to places to move to and companies to go work for, in really positions. And I really did a lot of homework. I interviewed with a lot of companies. The job market in 2007 is much like it is today. It was a great job market, and I had a lot of people offer me jobs, and I chose to move to Atlanta and come work for UPS, and it was a great decision.
Absolutely. 12 years later, you're doing big things, doing bigger things. I think your current role as Director of International Air Freight, LMG, was a role you recently were promoted into, right?
Yeah, I've been really blessed at UPS. So I jumped into UPS at a great opportunity. We really had these amazing capabilities to support government business, but we were underwhelming it. So I jumped into an opportunity that I was totally empowered to make changes, and I was able to make changes to our strategy, how we engaged. And we significantly grew the business, and I was, UPS appreciated it. I was promoted 3 times within my first 5 years here at UPS. And I went on to be the director of global government operations. And I did that job for a full 12 years. And at the beginning of this year, like UPS does, they tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to do something else. And now I'm in charge of essentially the strategy on our top 50 global air freight trade lanes.
So before we go over to John Phillips and kind of get a same appreciation for his professional journey, one quick question for you, Lloyd. For the hiring managers out there in supply chain that want to benefit and want to tap into the veteran community and get better at engaging and hiring and onboarding veterans, what would be one thing, far and away, one piece of advice you could offer those hiring managers?
Exactly. Is, military resumes sometimes aren't the greatest. They've really improved over the years. But a piece of advice I would give is, hey, if you see a blip with the resume, look beyond that. Bring that veteran in and give them an opportunity to sell their skills and tell you what they did in the military. And then in the military as well, everybody's involved in logistics.
That's right.
So almost every single job you have is logistics. One of the best hires I ever had in the UPS was I hired a mess sergeant. And he didn't even really know that he was a logistician. And he sat down with the interview for me, and my dad happened to be an Army mess sergeant. And I actually had to sell him that he was a logistician. I was like, you're doing short-term planning, you're doing long-term planning, and he's worked out really well at UPS. So give them an opportunity to come in and sell themselves to you.
Love that. All right, so switching over to John Phillips here. Author of Boots to Loafers. So, John, same question to you. Give our audience a sense of who you are, that professional journey you've made, including the transition and what you do now.
Well, I first joined the military similar to Lloyd here, right out of high school, and I was a nothing private,
right?
And which was a little unusual for my dad. My dad is a retired colonel from the Army, and I'll never forget. When I signed the contract, I didn't tell my parents. And my father, one of his jobs, he used to be the commander of the Southeast Region Recruiting District for the Army. And when I told him I had enlisted, after a few choice words, he said, you tell your recruiter to get in here and I want to talk to him. Oh. And I said, I'll tell her to come right over. So, I enlisted into the field artillery, spent 3 years enlisted, got out after 3 years as an E4. I then went to immediately, 2 weeks after I got out, started college, went to a junior college because I knew I was a very bad student. So I needed really going to get a leg up. Plus, I hadn't studied anything in years, so I needed to figure out how to do that. Went and got my associate's degree and then transferred to the University of Central Florida, and I got my degree in finance. And really the way I look at it is I wanted to major in something that I could use after 20 years. I actually knew I wanted to be a soldier when I was 5 years old. It's what I was driven, and that's what I wanted to do, and I did it and enjoyed it and had a great time. Heck, I was getting paid to blow things up and go camping. What more could you want? So when I got out, got my degree, and actually went back into the field artillery and went back to the very same unit that I was in Germany, except as a lieutenant this time, and ran into E5, E6s, and E7 sergeants that were peers of mine when I left 4 years before. We were all E4s together.
Right.
And they had stayed. Back in those days, you could homestead a lot wherever you wanted to homestead. So served, I think I beat Lloyd. I think I was in 20 years, 14 days.
Okay.
So served my 20 years. And so my transition was I retired from the Army on a Friday, or went on terminal leave on a Friday, and I started with the Coca-Cola Company on a Monday.
Man.
So there really was no the transition for me was trying to figure out what the heck I was doing in corporate America, because at that time, and I'm finding out even today, the transition services that are provided to the military service members by each of the services is lacking. That was the genesis of Boots to Loafers. That's why I wrote the book. I got so upset about how I was ill-prepared for corporate America that I really put pen to paper, and over the course of many, many years, I kept notes, and the notes turned into a notebook, and I said, I need to do something with this. So I hired an editor and hired a guy out in L.A. that was an HR guy, and he helped me write a lot of the HR stuff, because I'm definitely not an HR person. And that's kind of what happened with Boots to Loafers.
So now, and y'all might be familiar with this as well. I read the other day that the Transition Assistance Program, TAP, is in the process of getting retooled and rolled back out, and hopefully in a much more effective manner. I don't know if y'all have seen the news reports on that.
Well, it's been needed for years. There's so many different. I can tell you from my experience in dealing with transitioning military, even as recent as this year, it's amazing what I find out. What individuals these service members are not told. Everything from VA federal benefits to state benefits and entitlements that you get to just financial planning, simple things like that.
So one of the things about TAP is it's time constrained. So for the large part, it's only 3 days. So that program is just going to be a baseline and to give you resources to go out and educate yourself. And I think that's certainly what both John and I did. The great thing about now versus when we retired is there's a lot more nonprofits that are engaged, and there's a lot of resources now that are able and willing to provide you free assistance and your spouse free assistance to help with that transition.
Seems like more than ever this day and age there is a lot more support for military spouses, which is I think that's been a blind spot in a lot of the support and assistance and resources that have been available out there for decades. By extension, that wasn't always offered for military spouses. That's been a neat thing to watch happen. So John, same question for you. If speaking to the hiring managers across supply chain, again, that folks that want to engage, they understand the wealth of talent that can be found in the veteran community, and folks that want to engage and get them hired and get them onboarded successfully, what's the one thing that stands out that these folks can do that will make this task much, much easier?
I think understanding they're not going to get the 100% solution that they may be looking for when it comes to talent. I think understanding that 80% is okay, because you need to really have that space in there where somebody can grow and develop and expand, and because you're starting a new career, whether you're a first termer or a mid termer or a career military person. You're starting over, because you know how when you join, you're indoctrinated into the military. When I left home to come here, I was watching Stripes, and it was the very beginning of it where they're going in and everybody's getting a haircut and everybody's coming out the other end, and guess what? They all look alike. They're on green, they wear green, and they're buzz head. Yeah. So you're going through this indoctrination. What folks have got to understand is, what I would tell you is a lot of hiring managers, they don't understand the capabilities that a lot of veterans bring to the plate. And I think if they tap into their local, in the company resource, if they actually have a veteran business resource group, tap into that talent, tap into that knowledge, and use those folks that are veterans that can help them. They can help them read resumes. They can help them with hiring events that they do. They can help them in multiple different ways to better understand the world that these individuals came from. It's way different than corporate America.
Absolutely. All right, so switching gears a little bit here, because you've touched on something we're going to talk a lot more about, the notion of the VBRG and its role, I'm sure, in founding and building VETLANTA. So we'll talk more about that in a second, but hold that thought. So one of my more recent favorite articles is written by Barry Hochfelder. And Barry, I apologize if I'm getting your last name wrong, but it was a great article in Supply Chain Dive entitled "Veterans Bring Skills and Can-Do Attitude to Supply Chain Jobs." Again, Supply Chain Dive from late 2018. I want to quote the front end of this article. So here we are on the heels of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and here, July 4th is just a couple days away. Barry talks about how, quote, the men and women who, without computer aid, arranged for almost 6,000 ships, 11,590 aircraft, 156,000 troops, 54,186 vehicles, and 104,428 tons of supplies on the beaches of Normandy in 1944 were logisticians of the first order. 27 days after the June 6th invasion, there were more than 1 million Allied troops, 566,648 tons of supplies, and over 171,000 vehicles ashore. So, end quote. You might ask, what is that ROI? Defeating totalitarianism. And that is, I love as I first stumbled across this article, and of course the passion we all have about helping veterans find employment in the private sector on the other side of their transition. That communicates to me the sense of mission and the sense that we're going to get this done. I know it's never been done before, but we're going to make it happen because of the odds, because of what's at stake. And military men and women find a way. They find a way at the end of the day, and that speaks volumes to me. So with that background, the question I want to pose to both of y'all is, why are supply chain careers such an opportunity for veterans? And Lloyd, let's start with you.
Yeah, I love that example that you gave. Another one of my favorite, being a crew member, was a couple years later, the Berlin Airlift.
Yes.
So the Berlin Airlift is absolutely amazing. We've never saw anything like that at that time. To resupply a city completely by air, which is just mind-boggling to think about it now. So I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. Every veteran or every military member has some part of logistics or supply chain in their career field. You could be an artilleryman like John. You could be in the infantry. You could be a crew member. Part of your job is going to be logistics, and I like to focus on leadership. And every supply chain job, every logistics job, there's going to be some sort of leadership component into it. And I'll look at some of the training I received in the military. I went to NCO preparatory school, how to become a sergeant. I went to the NCO Academy, the Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, and the First Sergeant Academy. And in the Air Force, our professional military education is about leadership and management, becoming more effective, communicating, giving speeches, writing papers, becoming a program manager. And the first course was 2 weeks long, and the second one was 6 weeks. The third one was 8 weeks, and then another 6-week class. And I look around corporate America. Corporate America is not spending that kind of spend on their executives. And, the military is doing that for, their enlisted leaders and their officers. And that's absolutely amazing. And the value somebody with that formal management leadership can bring to your supply chain organization is just immense.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the Berlin Airlift on the front end of that answer, Lloyd, and I cannot for the life of me think about the name of the cigar-chopping Air Force general that led I can picture him, and maybe Malcolm in the research team will shoot me a note here before we finish up. But we'll circle back on that.
So the one that I remember, and I actually had the privilege of meeting a couple times, was Gil Halverson. So Gil Halverson was the candy bomber. So he was the one who was flying C-47 and decided to throw candy bars out of the airplane and make little parachutes out of handkerchiefs, and that developed into a movement there in the Berlin Airlift. And they got the chance to meet a Colonel Halverson, and the Air Force actually named their K-loader, which is a piece of equipment to load an airplane.
I was certified on the K-loader.
Yeah, so the latest one that they had when I was there was the Halverson K-loader.
I don't remember that name, but they didn't let me touch too much equipment when I was in the Air Force. But that was one. That was the like the elevator, like lift,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
We had the KC-135 at McConnell, and so we'd put cargo in that, above the all the fuel that's stored in the belly of the aircraft, and of course the wings. And I still I got that card somewhere. I'm gonna dig that up. Maybe I've got a trucker post career set up for me. But so John, same question to you. So let's talk about why supply chain careers are such a great opportunity for veterans.
Well, I mean, it's just like what we've been saying. I think every veteran out there is touched by. They're in the supply chain, and I'll go back on my career as an artilleryman. It's kind of two-pronged. The first prong is you're mission oriented. You're there to support the maneuver forces, the tankers and the grunts. That's your primary mission, but you're not going to be able to do that unless the logistic side is fully up and operational. Are they supplying beans, bullets, gas, diesel, and all the supply parts that you need in order to repair the equipment? If you don't have all of that stuff, then you're not going to do the mission. It's not going to happen because you're going to break and you're going to sit there, and now you're out of operation. There's just everything that we do in the military ties back to supply chain. One of the things that I always tell folks is for every trigger puller, there's 11 people behind them that are supporting them in supply chain. And from your example on D-Day, I mean, my father landed on D-Day at Omaha Beach, and the thing that is fascinating about those statistics that you quoted there is, can you imagine what they had? If you just follow the tail of the supply chain all the way to the origins, can you imagine what it took just to feed them? Just to feed them. That's incredible to me. Back in those days when nothing was automated. It was all stubby pencil and pieces of paper, probably, and carbon paper. You'll have to explain that on a different podcast. But I mean, it's just amazing the things that can be done by the military because we're mission oriented. You give us a mission, and Lloyd probably experienced this at UPS like I did at Coca-Cola when I was during my career at Coca-Cola. You give me a mission, and I'm going to figure out how to do it. Whether I have the resources or not, I'm going to figure out how to do it. That's what we're trained to do.
Yep. In hearing both of y'all address that question, one of the things that really stands out, especially in today's global economy with global end-to-end supply chains, working upstream and downstream based on where you are in the supply chain, you've got to be able to effectively communicate, problem solve, understand root cause, work in those teams, right? And I think that's one thing that the military really gets right. When I was a data analyst in the Air Force, we worked with the maintainers, we worked with the officers that were in charge with managing the operations and the maintenance operations upstream and downstream, and there was a camaraderie that is so unique to the military, and it really just serves as a grease that lubes the skids to make that cross-functional collaboration happen. So, and hearing both of y'all kind of answer that question about why supply chain careers are such a great opportunity for veterans, that's certainly one thing that stood out in my mind. Lloyd, you were going to add something else? No,
I think you're absolutely right. The ability to work effectively in teams and then work across the great spectrum. As an E7 in Headquarters Air Mobility Command, I could be on the phone with an E1, airman basic, working operational issues, and then at the same time walk down the hallway and have a conversation with the 4-star general at a headquarters. And I mean, there's not too many organizations that you can have that kind of experience with.
Absolutely.
I could tell you that here's a little story about a sergeant first class who was he was actually interning with I hope I don't get struck by lightning here since we're at UPS, but he was interning at DHL, and he was at the Duracell warehouse. So about a year ago, we had these hurricanes hit South Carolina, North Carolina, and everything, and it was devastating. The interesting thing was this Sergeant First Class, these hurricanes hit, and all of a sudden everything goes into crisis management. And it's and he basically, what happened is things got a little chaotic, and he literally stepped up and took charge at the Duracell warehouse right here in the south side of Atlanta because they needed to get Duracell batteries to South Carolina and North Carolina because there was no electricity or anything. So they tried to push this stuff out. They had no contingency plan. He wrote it like on the spot, like from his experience from being a logistician in the 82nd Airborne. And he got in there and just literally took charge. And so the long story short is he finished his internship, and they actually came back to me and they said, we want more of him. They were blown away. And he just did what he was trained to do.
And nobody was shooting at him or blowing stuff
That's
around.
right. but I'll tell you, when he stepped up, everybody paid attention.
Yeah, very cool.
So Malcolm and the research team got back to me. General Curtis LeMay,
Curtis
Old
LeMay.
Iron Pants was one of his nicknames. I'm not going to mention some of the others, but he led, I believe, the Berlin Airlift Lloyd, and was known for chomping on stogies amongst other incredible leadership. And going back to something you said, John, you find a way.
You find a way.
You find a way. So, all right. So this next segment of today's conversation here on the VETLANTA Voice on Supply Chain Now Radio, we're going to dive into the VETLANTA story. And so for you listeners that may be in Minnesota or Canada or over in Europe somewhere, and you may be thinking, okay, how does this apply to me? Is this yet one more Atlanta story? Well, I would argue that the why and what it's done and the benchmark or the best practices that you stand to benefit from makes this really a universal topic. So while we're proud of VETLANTA and what it's done here in Atlanta, stick with us because I think you can stand to gain something. And if nothing else, you will absolutely better understand, as John and Lloyd have been doing a great job of sharing the kind of the mindset of the veteran community. All right, so let's dive right into VETLANTA. So we want to start with why. Why was the need? Why the need for VETLANTA? And Lloyd, let's start with you.
I'll take it back to my story, my VBRG story. So when I got to
and VBRG, Veteran Business.
Yeah, Veteran Business Resource Group, Veteran Affinity Groups. It's something that falls usually in the diversity and inclusion umbrella of a company. And when I started at UPS 12 and a half years ago, what was missing was there was a couple. First, my network had just disappeared overnight. I retired on a Friday and started with UPS on a Monday in a new city. But what was really missing for me was the esprit de corps, the morale. The teams that I had and I worked with, and I missed the Air Force from day one. And I was doing well, but there was always something missing. And about 5 years into my career, UPS decided to go this business resource group route, and they authorized the business units to start them. And we started a Latino group, a African American group, a Pride group, and a Veterans group. And I had really the privilege of starting the very first one at UPS here at our corporate office. And I ran that for 2 1-year stints and really got it up and running and handed it off. And right about 6 months before I handed it off, I got this call from Coca-Cola, from one of John's peers, and John was putting together this collaboration session to find out what different Fortune 500 companies were doing for veterans. And because I think very arrogantly he thought at the time Coca-Cola was the only one in the city doing anything, and
John's ready to weigh in on that. I think
so. Really, he called these groups in, and I'll let him take over here in a second and tell why he called these groups in. But it was an amazing session. That very first meeting, we had about 20 people in from about a dozen different organizations. And we talked about what each of our companies or organizations were doing to support veterans. And what we found out was our organizations were doing amazing things nationally, but even more important locally. And we just weren't talking to each other. So John, you want to tell us a little bit why your brilliant idea of calling these organizations together?
Well, the other thing we found out is, and you just touched on it at the end, is we didn't know each other, and that was the beginnings of the whole initiative, really. Because when we concluded that meeting, I kind of threw the gauntlet down and said, "Can you imagine what we'd do if we banded together?" Because I do understand, you start to pull all these organizations and these major corporations together, and you get them to back you, which has taken us a little bit of time to happen, but it has happened in spades. I mean, we have dozens of companies that are backing us now, as far as being a legitimate organization and everything. And it's been incredible what we've been able to accomplish over the last 5.5 years. So, we finished that first meeting. We went to another meeting. And then all of a sudden it just started really developing. And somewhere along the route, a company by the name of J. Walter Thompson, who does all the marketing for the Marine Corps for the past 70, 80 years, they stepped up and they basically said, "We want to help you out. You can come to our offices." They actually assigned a program manager or a project manager to oversee the entire thing, and this was actually part of this person's job. And so we would go to work during the day, and then we would go up here to Buckhead, and we would go to JWT for 2-3 hours. And I mean, we're doing like sticky notes on the windows, and the big poster
strategy
board.
sessions.
Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, this went on for weeks, and they came back. So the name of VETLANTA, the logo of VETLANTA, our foundational structure and vision was all done by J. Walter Thompson. We voted on it. We had some pretty healthy conversations about it, and that's one of the things that I think has really helped VETLANTA is don't be afraid to push back on somebody. But at the end of the day, once the decision is made on what direction we're going to go in, you salute the flagpole and you move on. And it's worked that way for 5.5 years now, and it's worked quite well.
And sometimes you got to wear your body armor into those pancake breakfasts, right?
You do. It's like going to an AAR at NTC or JRTC where it's brutal. Because everyone's going to tell you just how messed up you are. But, part of this journey, the second or third year or so, we were really kicking around, are we going to be a club? Are we going to be a nonprofit? What are we going to blah, blah? So we made a decision that we were going to be a club. So the two foundational tenets or so, if that's what you want to call it for VETLANTA, is we are apolitical. We don't take any political affiliation one way or the other. And the second is, and more importantly, this is really the big one, is we don't take anybody's money. We don't want your money. And believe it or not, that has opened so many doors for us. We had the VA secretary come to Atlanta to meet with us. He had heard about us, and he just could not figure out, how do you function and you have no money? And I think it turned into like a 2-hour conversation with this guy.
So if I can, so for our audience listeners, we're talking with Lloyd Knight and John Phillips, co-founders of VETLANTA and business leaders and supply chain leaders as well. And I want to go back. I want to make sure our audience hears a couple things loud and clear that y'all have already just shared. And this is, whether the Clevelands or Seattles or you name it. I'm not picking on those two cities, but any other listener that has a passion for moving the needle for the veteran community, especially from a business standpoint, these are lessons you can take back and it's a benchmarking opportunity. And the first one, John, you mentioned was, don't let the four walls contain all of your engagement. I think it would have been easy. I mean, you both y'all represent organizations, Fortune 500 iconic brands, and it's easy, I'm sure, to sit within the four walls and all the things that were greatly going on at Coca-Cola Company and UPS. However, the thing that I heard made VETLANTA such a smashing success and make it more powerful is how these companies came together. Despite what they were doing individually, they came together. And then the second thing that I think we've got to make sure our audience is well aware of that VETLANTA does so well is the vetting. In this day and age, and Lloyd, you talk about the nonprofit ratings that are out there, the pancake breakfast, which was what we mentioned a second ago. John and Lloyd use these pancake breakfasts at the Pancake House up in Alpharetta as a means of better understanding all these nonprofits that have raised up in recent years. Some are on a noble mission. Others are something a little bit different. And so how important is that vetting? And I'm trying to be very sensitive here, but how important in this day and age is the vetting of these resources? Well,
the vetting is really important, and I'll explain the pancake breakfast a little more in detail. When we first started this
Don't
group,
forget the bacon
and the crispy bacon. When we first started this mission, we got a lot of attention because you got to remember who were our members, who were driving this thing, and we had UPS and Coca-Cola and Delta, Home Depot, GE, AT&T, McKesson, John Walter Thompson. We had some great companies, so everybody wanted to be involved. And one of the lessons we learned is not everybody that says they help veterans really honestly provide value to veterans. And so we had to figure out this avenue on how to vet them. And John was a finance leader at Coca-Cola. I'm doing big things here at UPS. There wasn't enough hours in the day. I think at the beginning it was, hey, let's squeeze in coffee here or after hours here. And after hours, we ended up having a lot of our board meetings. And, Scott was a pillar director for a while, and we had our pillar meetings. So the only time to really meet with these nonprofit groups were at breakfast. And so our first breakfast, some of them were as early as 6 a.m., and then I think we pivoted to 6:30, even 7. But in the early ones, we were meeting with 2, 3, 4 nonprofits at a time. And what we found out was to vet them, we would just ask very straightforward questions. What value are you providing veterans?
People, I will tell you, a lot of these companies or organizations got very uncomfortable. You'd see them start squirming in their seat because you're putting them on the spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue that we need to put some of these nonprofits. I mean, unfortunately, I've had a similar experience. Rubbing elbows with folks that we heard ABC, and that was anything but that what was really going on. And that's such a, at the end of the day, it's not about what folks are getting away with, but more importantly, it's about how veterans, unfortunately, not only do they get tied up in these groups that may not, at the end of the day, help them, but also all the misinformation and the noise out there and how that takes away from these groups that are important to veterans' transition and their well-being and their success on the other side,
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we wanted to try to do was to align services these groups offered, to provide the right service at the right time, to the right person to have an impact. And transitioning is now, when John and I retired, there wasn't that many resources. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of resources. So it's like running down a hallway full sprints and people yelling at you on both sides and trying to figure out who's going to help me, who's going to help my family. So one of the things I'm very proud of with VETLANTA is the organizations that we've teamed up with to help veterans and their families. And another thing I'm really proud of is we've built this huge organization. We've kept money out of it, but we've also tried to keep it really pure. And one of the questions that we ask ourselves in these board meetings all the time is like, hey, this topic we're talking about, does it help veterans? Because if it doesn't help veterans, let's move on to the next topic.
Yeah, focused mission. All right, so we've kind of talked about why the need. We've kind of talked a little bit about the genesis of VETLANTA. Let's talk more about what it does. Yeah, I think I know VETLANTA has got they're touching so many aspects of what veterans need. And you mentioned the Pillar program. That might be a good place to start. But what does VETLANTA do?
Come on, John. I want to hear it. VETLANTA is a collaborator on what?
Steroids. That's what we do. I mean, it's the biggest thing that came out of this entire journey that we've been on for 5.5 years is we have, it's really just developed into it, but we know how to collaborate and bring organizations together. So if you look at the structure of VETLANTA, and it's what we call it is the VETLANTA ecosystem. We deal with for-profit companies, nonprofit companies, governmental agencies, both state, federal, and local, as well as academia, and it's the wide spectrum. It's everything from four-year colleges to technical colleges. We bring all of them together in a room for one reason and one reason only, to help veterans and their families, really, to help veterans and their families. And what we do is we collaborate on steroids. We bring people together from all of these organizations and companies, and believe it or not, a lot of them, they don't know each other. Even in the nonprofit space, where you've got 45,000 plus of these organizations out of there, this is a John Phillips statistic, 80% of them aren't worth even talking to because they're after one thing, $1. And what we do is we get them all in a room and we all have conversations. So my comment to a lot of these organizations, especially the nonprofits that are always out there beating the bush looking for the almighty dollar, is would you rather have a piece of the dollar or none? Take your pick.
That's pretty clear cut.
Yeah, and one of the great things we do for nonprofit organizations, most of them need money, so we're not against that. But what we are there for is to make sure they're providing value to veterans, right? And one of the great things we offer from the Fortune 500 perspective of VETLANTA, we offer them an avenue into our organizations. Neither John and I were in a position for Coca-Cola or UPS to write anybody a check. It wasn't going to happen. But all of our companies would have tracking systems to track volunteer hours. And I can tell you from the UPS side of the house, we've got this great foundation that is providing a tremendous amount of resources internationally, including the veteran space. But one of the things they do when somebody applies for a grant is they look to see how many employee volunteer hours. And a lot of nonprofits just have no idea about that system or even how to find a champion with a company. And that's one of our early discussions we always have is like, hey, VETLANTA doesn't have any money. Our members don't work for the foundations. We're not going to write you a check, but what we can do is we can educate you on the process, and even better is help you find volunteers within our organizations.
Well, and then the other part of it is especially for, not to pick on nonprofits all the time, but to Lloyd's point, they're nonprofits, but they're always out looking for a way to fund themselves. Sure. You got to date whoever it is you're wanting to talk to, whether it's a UPS, a Coke, a Home Depot Foundation, Marcus Foundation, whoever. You just don't meet them the first time and go, oh, by the way, I need $25,000.
Or $250,000. It's big amounts.
It ain't going to happen. And Lloyd knows this. A lot of these major corporations, they get asked for money all the time, and they get tone deaf. The advantage that we have in VETLANTA through the BRG networks is we know our companies. We know the people that we need to approach. But what we can do for them, for the companies ahead of time, is we can vet these organizations. And trust me, we're pretty tough. We can sniff out the folks that are just telling a story. Lloyd's got a great story about a couple of guys that were doing cruises because they wanted to go on cruises, and they were actually hustling people and getting money to go on cruises.
I need to put a legal disclaimer in here that Supply Chain Now Radio is not. No, I'm kidding. So, but you're illustrating that's reality.
It's real.
These and while on one side of the coin, no pun intended, the corporations are asked for money all the time, right? But on the flip side, go back to the veteran, they get, they're overwhelmed with a ton of resources and limited time, limited money. I mean, you transition once, right? Or maybe twice, a couple times, but for some folks. But, when they're burnt once or when someone lets them down, they can shy away from the outstanding resources that are out there. And that's the true I think, just from where I sit, that's one of the biggest challenges, biggest threats we have, as we're all looking for ways to better support the veterans in transition. Man, we got to your point, we got to root them out for the folks that aren't doing the noble mission thing, and we got to make sure that gets communicated.
Well, and what I would tell you from, let's say you're a transitioning service member, and you're looking for what's the next phase of my life, and if they want to come to Atlanta, we have done all of the hard work of vetting the organizations. We have the know-how and wherewithal to help these individuals and steer them in the right direction. Not necessarily what VETLANTA can do for them, but we can definitely point them in the right direction of who to go and talk to. One of our partners, Hire Heroes USA, they do an incredible job with resumes. They also can help you find a job as well at certain levels and things. But we have all of these partners within the community here of Atlanta, and even I keep circling back to the BRGs because that's where we started.
Yeah.
So you have all of these veterans that already work for these major companies that understand the hiring process of these companies. And half the battle of getting hired by these companies is how do I get my foot in the door?
Yep. And let's talk.
We can help with that.
That's right. And so let's talk about that. But before we do, one little interesting connection, because I think when in the early days of VETLANTA, John, I believe you were in a procurement leadership role with Coca-Cola. Is that right? Finance. Okay. You're previous to that. I remember you telling the story on that second episode. You're going into some of these plants and auditing inventories and stuff. All right. So I'm going to put you in the supply chain finance bucket. Okay. Obviously, Lloyd is UPS proud supply chainer. And I bet, I don't know all the other folks that came together to really found VETLANTA, but my hunch is that supply chain know-how and can-do, that spirit had a lot to do with it, right?
Well, yeah.
So
we're in Atlanta.
That's supply chain city.
Hello.
That's right. So let's talk
trademark.
So let's talk about you're just finishing your point on business networking, because that's a huge gap for many. I mean, Lloyd, you're talking about how you lost your network from Friday to Monday because you went from the military side to the private sector side. And I should also say a disclaimer for our audience: we're sitting with two unique folks, because I would argue most overwhelming majority of folks coming out of the military don't leave or retire on a Friday and start with a role on a new exciting role, much less on a Monday.
Not only that, you don't hang with the same company for your entire second career, like I know I have and Lloyd has.
Absolutely. All right. So, but business networking, helping veterans make those connections and helping them establish, grow, and build their networks. We're coming off the first Super Summit, which was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where over 1,000 folks came out to the VETLANTA Super Summit. In y'all's view, when it comes to networking and making connections, what role does that play?
We looking at our summits, our very first summit we talked about, it was 25 people. And then we have quarterly summits. This last one was 1,000 people. And we've put together great agendas and have amazing guest speakers. Governor Brian Kemp was our last keynote speaker. We've had the Inspector General of the Army. We've had the acting Secretary of the Army. We've had some great speakers. But really the most valuable portion is the 90 minutes beforehand where we network. And veterans are very interesting. Veterans build great networks internally, and they use their networks internally, and then it comes time to transition, and it's like they forget how to do it. They haven't built an external network, and they don't know where to go to network. And what we've built together is here in VETLANTA is this instant network that you can plug and play. And I'm still amazed that how many people we introduce. Where, maybe not the direct introduction, but maybe 2 or 3 levels down, somebody gets a job out of that network.
Absolutely.
And I think we see more people get a job from that network versus a direct application somewhere else. So really, really important. Veterans, if you're not using LinkedIn, absolutely develop a LinkedIn profile, start using LinkedIn, connect with the supply chain leaders, logistics leaders. And I think this is something that John and I found. Most people want to help veterans.
Absolutely.
The worst they're going to do is ignore you if you ask for assistance. So yeah.
If I could paint just a quick picture, and John will get you to weigh in on Super Summit as well, but I think one of the things that makes the summits in general here at VETLANTA and the Super Summit certainly successful, and I think one of the biggest best practices that groups, wherever you are, in different cities, different geographic areas, can learn from, is that at that Super Summit at the incredible Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is one heck of a venue to get, by the way, you had dozens of suppliers and resources and folks that can help veterans all set up shop. So
46 of them.
46. I knew I was going to get that number wrong. But so you had 46 resources. So veterans knew that if they could come out, the 1,000 folks came out, they signed up for free. Didn't charge a dime. Going back to John, something you said. So not only are they coming out for free at a world-class venue where they're going to meet other veterans and more equally as important folks that want to help, but it's all going to be right there with food. And then they're going to hear from some of these folks that you just spoke to that do want to help.
Before we go any further, the one great thing about our VETLANTA Summit, it's not only for veterans that need help.
Great point.
And I think more people come to those summits that are looking to get engaged in their community, maybe volunteer activism. And, our summits are usually, the byproduct is helping a veteran. Really, they're used to inspire, motivate, inform those community volunteers, veteran or non-veterans, that are looking to get engaged in the community and provide value to the community.
Yeah, it's not a job fair.
That's right.
It's not a job fair. I mean, it's to me, it's. I can tell you when we have these summits, I oftentimes sit to the side, and I just want to. I'm an observer. I like to observe and see what's going on, and I'll spend a lot of times pushing these vets to go talk with people because they're so reserved sometimes. And I mean, in the military, you don't talk about yourself.
Right.
You'll do it once, and then you're going to be ostracized off to the side because all of a sudden it's all about you. Well, when you get out in corporate America, it is all about you. Because if you don't talk about yourself, and it's what I talk about in my book is talking about you're changing what did I do to or actually changing what did we do to what did I do? And you've got to make that transition and start talking about that because you are your best marketing person to market yourself. And I spend a lot of time doing that and pushing these folks out there and say, get out there and meet people, shake their hand, get to know who they are. And then the most important thing is what's your follow-up? Because the one thing I can tell you at our summits, you don't know who you're going to meet. This Super Summit we just had, I mean, we had some pretty high-speed C-level executives roaming around, and you got to have your elevator pitch ready to go, and you got to know what you want to do. And if you don't, we can, again, going back to what I said previously, we can point you in the right direction to get that skill set and practice and things like that to help you along.
Outstanding. So. Come off the heels of this huge Super Summit at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, home of the Falcons and the world champion
Atlanta United.
Yes, Atlanta United. Thank you. All right. So what's next? What's the next big event?
We have our Q3 Summit is going to be on September 25th at Coca-Cola. Is hosting, and that's going to be dedicated to the female veterans. So we're really looking forward to that. If you want some more information, keep your eye out at vetlanta.org, VETLANTA.org. Sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get invites to our summits, and you'll get the written version of the VETLANTA Voice once a month. And but we have a lot of great things. One of the things we're really excited that we're working on is to be more engaged from a lot of our engagement for the first 3 years of VETLANTA was at a tactical level, hosting events, job fairs, providing individual assistance. And now we've developed really to focus on policy. and and engagement and networking, and more on the strategic level. And something we did about a year ago was we invited both state and federal legislators into a room and had them all sit down at the table. And one of the things that amazed us was some of the same lessons we learned in the first VETLANTA Summit. Nobody knew each other, which was shocking. And they not only did they not know each other, they didn't know a lot of the resources that were out there. You know, they all knew about the American Legion and VFW and, you know, how to engage with the VA. But that was only a very small percentage of organizations that are out there. And then some of their policies weren't great. You know, some of their assumptions they made were wrong. And so what we're really excited about is we're going to start having this regular conversation. And we think we're going to gain a lot out of it. And we're going to be able to use our network really to guide policy and better inform the legislators, both federally, statewide, and locally. John, what do you think?
No, I think it's you know, the one thing we've definitely done very well is we keep our eye on the ball. We have not just sat back on our laurels and talk about how great we are and all this stuff. I mean, Lloyd and I talk all the time, and we're always talking about, you know, how do we make things better? And this is a shift in strategy for us. And in really getting into the policy and there are a lot of things that we can do in the state of Georgia and capitalize and go to other states in the union and see what are other states doing. That's just one little piece of it, but what are other states doing for their vets from a state perspective?
Right.
And what can we do to help with and then translate that over into legislative changes, possibly. And figure out how we do that. That's something new. Nobody else is doing that, by the way.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the phrases that I've heard you, if I've heard you say it once, I've heard you say it 1,000 times. Deeds, not words.
Yep.
Right. It's not about
Talk's
a
cheap.
fancy schmancy website or social media or meetings after meeting. It's about what are you doing.
Yep.
And that's what I admire about a lot of my experience with VETLANTA, where it's the days of service. It's being the VETLANTA's being a conduit between the veteran community and all the opportunities that have been vetted. You know, when we had Apex Atlanta, one of our sponsors, when we worked on with the Georgia Logistics Summit to have 1,000 seats for veterans. Well, we struggled with being able to reach the veterans and make sure they knew of this no strings opportunity with a fantastic Georgia Logistics Summit and Modex event. VETLANTA stepped in, and that we had over 100 veterans. That is all about action. You know, it's not about lip service. It's about taking action and really figuring out a way to move the needle in a very meaningful fashion. And that's, you know, I've always admired y'all's bias for action. That's exactly what y'all do.
Well, and I'm going to tell you that's actually the backbone of our vetting process. I can tell you, Lloyd and I have met with multiple companies, and all of a sudden we ask them a very simple question: can you outline for us what you've actually done?
Not your intentions, not your grand strategy,
not a bunch of talk.
Not your
give me the strategy briefing, and I want to know what's fact.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely. So we've already, Lloyd, you've already talked about how folks can learn more, and I want to encourage our listeners, folks, whether if you're in Atlanta and you want to plug in, if you want to help, if you want to serve, if you're a veteran that wants to plug in and take advantage of any of these resources, or if you are in a different geographic area and you want to compare notes with Lloyd or John, VETLANTA.org is the clearinghouse for that, right?
Yeah, and you can touch base with either John and I on LinkedIn as well. We're both big into LinkedIn. And I'll offer this. One of the things that I've done as president of VETLANTA is I've kept it local. So I wanted to focus on the 22 counties that make up the greater Atlanta area and serve veterans local. And we had this big call to franchise several years ago, and we were getting national attention. But the fact of the matter is there's not enough hours in the day. So, you know, I put in 500 hours a year volunteering to do this. And, all our positions, on the board or on the pillar team, folks are pretty busy. So I thought we would spread ourselves too thin, especially remaining a club. And but one of the things we've done is we've probably reached out to over 24 cities in the United States and provided them our charter. And our playbook, our best practices, certainly lessons learned. I think whenever I get on the phone with a representative from a company in another city, when we compare notes, it's oftentimes lessons learned.
This is one of these initiatives that it can't be a hey you, I need you to go do this. You got to want to do this work.
That's right.
We're all volunteers. We don't get paid one bloody cent for this. My personal satisfaction in this is this is what I was trained to do as an officer in the United States Army, is to take care of my troops. And that's all this is this is an extension of that, just like Lloyd being a first sergeant. Take care of your airmen.
People are our business is the motto of the first sergeant.
There you go. That's right. And it hasn't changed. That will never change, because at the end of the day, we have to take care of each other. We have that common thread. We have that common thread of the background and the sacrifices that we have made. To me, it's the least we can do is to give back. It's the least we can do to give back to our community and to grow within our community to help, because we're going to be able to help our own community here. Our job is also to educate the community. We are the other 1%. We need to educate that other 99%.
Absolutely.
And that's what I tell a lot of these transitioning service members that get into these companies around the Atlanta area is it is your responsibility, whether it doesn't matter if you're a first-termer or a career service member. To me, it is your responsibility to educate those people in that company, the other 99%, on the military, because most of them, the only thing they know about the military is what they see on the news and what they see in the movies, and we know how accurate both of those are.
Right. Absolutely. We're in the business of what was that motto?
People are our business.
People are our business. I think that is people are our business, and for the sake of this series, putting a spotlight and getting the word out, to your point, John, that's really going to be our North Star. So, Lloyd and John, it's been a pleasure. We could sit here. There's other stories we're going to have to save for later episodes, undoubtedly. But really have enjoyed this first conversation, this kind of this baseline we're putting in place here, and a lot more to come.
Hey, one of the things we can ask the listeners now is get in contact with us. Let us know what you want to talk about. Through this series, it's not going to be all about Vetlanta or Atlanta specific. So if you have any great topics you want us to cover, just let us know.
On that note, we will put a mechanism on the dedicated show page so folks can submit that feedback very easily. And John.
And let's not forget, 25 September, the Coca-Cola Company down on North Avenue. Keep an eye out on our website, on our LinkedIn site. Come out and join us. And we also have Facebook. And it's all centered around women veterans. And it's going to prove to be it's going to be impactful. So if you are a female veteran out there, or even an active duty guard or reservist that is looking to get out in the next, I'd say 12 to 18 months, your place of duty on the 25th of September is the Coca-Cola Company, because we can help direct you and guide you in the right direction.
Love it. So 24-hour PCS, right? Coca-Cola Company.
That's it.
Atlanta. All right. Vetlanta.org is a place to get more information. We've been talking with Lloyd Knight and John Phillips. Lloyd, Director of International Air Freight LMG at UPS Global Forwarding, also a co-founder and current president of Vetlanta. John Phillips, author of Boots to Loafers. Check it out. Great book dedicated to successful transition. John's also co-founder and vice president of Vetlanta. Okay, so we're going to wrap up on some upcoming events here at Supply Chain Now Radio. Come check us out in person. We've got a lot of trade shows we're going to be out at, starting with the 2019 AIAG SCAC Supply Chain and Quality Conference in beautiful North Charleston, South Carolina, September 12th through the 13th. All about the world of automotive. We are sponsored there by the Effective Syndicate. You can shoot us an email if you want more information on that event. Big partners of the Georgia Manufacturing Alliance. October 9th is the Georgia Manufacturing Summit. We're going to be there broadcasting live as well. You can learn more at georgiamanufacturingalliance.com. And come see us in Austin, Texas. We're going to be with EFT at the 2019 Logistics CIO Forum in beautiful and probably hot Austin, although it's going to be November 7th through the 8th, 2019. So hopefully by then it's cooled off just a smidge. You can learn more about that event by shooting us a note, Scott, SCOTT, at supplychainradio.com. We'll get you the details. In fact, on that note, if you've heard anything today that you can't happen to find through Google or vetlanta.org or the internets, you can shoot us a note, Scott, at supplychainradio.com. We'll get you in touch with the right resources. Once again, big thanks to our guests today, Lloyd Knight, John Phillips. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I look forward to the next installment of the VETLANTA Voice podcast series right here on Supply Chain Now Radio. To our listeners, be sure to check out other upcoming events, replays of our interviews, other resources at supplychainnowradio.com. Find us again on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, all the other leading sites where podcasts can be found. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. On behalf of the entire Supply Chain Now Radio team, this is Scott Luton wishing you a wonderful and safe July 4th Independence Day. Great week ahead, and we'll see you next time on Supply Chain Now Radio.